Have you ever witnessed a seemingly harmless activity spiral into a full-blown HOA Karen meltdown? In today's outrageous tale, a couple of kind-hearted kids open a little lemonade stand, only to face the fury of a determined neighbor who seems to live for community drama. Will the kids' simple dream be crushed by petty rules, or will kindness and a surprising twist prevail? Before we dive in, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below if you've ever clashed with an HOA Karen in your own neighborhood. Now get ready for Karen versus the lemonade stand, the Sour Showdown. For 13-year-old Chloe and 11-year-old Marcus, summer vacation in the West Oak Meadows neighborhood meant free time, bike rides, and daydreams about how to spend their allowance. One scorching July afternoon, Chloe proposed a grand idea, a lemonade stand right in their driveway. It was hardly a novel concept, but these siblings had something more than pocket change in mind. "Let's donate half of what we make to the Willow Creek Animal Shelter," Chloe suggested, eyes shining. She'd read online that the shelter needed funds for medical supplies. Marcus, who adored animals almost as much as his sister, was immediately on board. That weekend, they got to work. Their mom provided a folding table. Their dad helped paint a wooden sign reading, "Lemonade for a cause, 50 cents per cup." By mid-morning Saturday, the sun was blazing, the air thick with humidity, and the kids were ready. Neighbors out on walks slowed down, curious about the bright sign. A few strolled over to chat, sampling the cold, tangy lemonade with smiles of approval. Within the first hour, Chloe and Marcus had already sold dozens of cups. Their makeshift tip jar even boasted a few crumpled dollar bills. The siblings beamed at each other. This was more successful than they'd hoped. Standing on the opposite side of the street, however, was an observer who wore a markedly less enthusiastic expression. Karen Hadley, the newly appointed HOA compliance officer. Tall with sharply cut blonde hair and a perpetual scowl, Karen was no stranger to confrontation. She'd spent the past few months methodically enforcing the West Oak Meadows rulebook, from sending out violation notices for mismatched mailbox paint to distributing stern letters over flower beds that exceeded the approved color palette. Karen peered over her large sunglasses at the children's setup. At first, she simply frowned. But as she studied the small crowd forming around the stand, neighbors lingering to chat, her lips curled into a look of disapproval. She tapped her foot impatiently on the sidewalk. Chloe, unaware of Karen's scrutiny, happily poured another cup of lemonade for Mrs. Ramirez next door, who praised the kids' charitable goal. "It's so wonderful of you both to think of those homeless animals." Karen's foot tapping grew louder. Something about a spontaneous gathering that she hadn't approved made her spine stiffen. Taking a deep breath, she marched across the street, the heels of her sandals clicking resolutely on the asphalt. Little did Chloe and Marcus know that their simple summer dream was about to collide with the unstoppable force of the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. Karen arrived at the lemonade stand with the air of a monarch inspecting a rebellious subject. She placed her hands on her hips and surveyed the children's arrangement with thinly veiled disdain. A hush fell over the small group of customers as they registered her presence. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chatter. The siblings exchanged a confused glance. "We're selling lemonade?" Chloe ventured hesitantly. Would you like to buy a cup?" She tried to smile, hoping to diffuse the tension. Karen's expression didn't budge. "I certainly would not. I'm the newly appointed compliance officer for this HOA, and I don't recall any mention of a permit for commercial activities in your driveway." Marcus blinked, perplexed. "A permit? But it's just lemonade." Karen let out an exasperated sigh, as though dealing with stubborn toddlers. Selling lemonade on residential property is an unapproved business operation. Have your parents filed an event permit with the HOA board? Did they pay the vendor fee? Chloe's eyes widened. She shook her head, too stunned to respond. Around them, neighbors traded uneasy looks. A few whispered about the rulebook. Some recalled hearing about no unauthorized yard sales or pop-up shops, but no one was entirely sure if it applied to a casual kid's lemonade stand. Sensing an audience, Karen leaned forward, her tone growing patronizing. "This neighborhood has standards. We can't let just anyone set up a store on the street. Property values would plummet." The idea that a 50-cent lemonade stand could crash property values was ridiculous, but the kids felt too intimidated to protest. Karen cleared her throat, narrowing her gaze. "I'll allow you to close up shop immediately and avoid a formal notice." That's your only warning. With that, she spun on her heel and strutted back to her house. In her wake, the once cheerful atmosphere dimmed. The siblings, hearts pounding, traded uncertain glances. A few supportive neighbors offered quiet words of encouragement, but no one wanted to pick a fight with Karen. As the small crowd dispersed, Chloe and Marcus realized their biggest obstacle to helping the animal shelter wasn't the heat or the cost of sugar. It was a determined, rule-wielding HOA Karen bent on shutting them down. Despite Karen's ominous threat, the siblings didn't fold their stand immediately. They opted to finish out the day, though business trickled after the confrontation. By late afternoon, they had earned close to $50 in total, a sum that felt monumental for two kids. A sense of accomplishment battled with a knot of dread in their stomachs. That evening, over dinner, Chloe and Marcus recounted the day's events to their parents. Their father's brow furrowed. "An HOA permit to sell lemonade," he scoffed. "That's news to me." Their mother, flipping through the neighborhood's official guidelines, paused at a section that read, "No unauthorized community sales." She bit her lip. Technically, she murmured, the HOA bylaws don't explicitly mention lemonade stands. But it does say any commercial activity on personal property requires prior board approval. Marcus set down his fork, frustration evident in his eyes. "So we can't raise money for the shelter? That's not fair." Their father's gaze hardened with determination. "Your stand is for a good cause. We'll talk to the HOA board. This can't be the first time someone's done a simple fundraiser in this neighborhood." Meanwhile, across the street, Karen sat at her dining table, meticulously drafting an email to the HOA board. Subject: urgent, unapproved business operation at 214 Maple Drive. She outlined the violation, emphasizing how unauthorized stands might degrade West Oak Meadows' prestigious image. She hit send with a self-satisfied smirk, imagining swift action in her favor. But unbeknownst to Karen, not everyone on the HOA board was as eager to wage war on kids selling lemonade. In fact, a few members found the whole thing petty. A subtle tension simmered among the board members. Some aligned with Karen's strict interpretation of rules, while others believed in neighborly goodwill. For the moment, Karen was blissfully unaware that her crusade might not be as unanimously supported as she hoped. That night, Chloe dreamed of the shelter's animals, puppies and kittens that might go without the supplies they needed if she and Marcus couldn't continue raising money. An unshakable resolve grew within her. The next morning, she would come up with a plan to keep the stand open, no matter what the rulebook said. After all, generosity shouldn't be shut down by red tape. Early Sunday morning, while the neighborhood still slept, Chloe pulled out markers and poster board. She crafted a new sign for the stand, larger, brighter, stating their charitable goal in bold letters: "Proceeds benefit Willow Creek Animal Shelter." Marcus joined in, scrawling cartoon paw prints around the border. Their hope? That a public declaration of altruism might sway any doubters. Around 10 o'clock, they reopened the lemonade stand. The first customers were neighbors who'd caught wind of the kids' run-in with Karen. Some arrived ready to show their solidarity, dropping extra bills into the tip jar. A man from 3 streets over even gave them a $5 donation, refusing the lemonade altogether. "Hate bullies," he muttered, "especially ones who go after kids doing good work." Encouraged by this show of support, Chloe and Marcus felt a surge of optimism. Maybe the entire community wasn't as strict as Karen. Maybe they could still raise enough funds for the shelter. Yet in the back of their minds, they knew trouble could strike at any moment, especially if Karen noticed they had ignored her ultimatum. Sure enough, around noon, her car pulled out of the driveway. She barely slowed as she passed the stand, but her gaze was unmistakably icy. Tension crackled in the hot summer air. Marcus gulped, hoping Karen would just head to the grocery store or wherever she was going, leaving them in peace for a little longer. But the real surprise came an hour later when an SUV pulled up and a woman with curly dark hair stepped out. She introduced herself as Monica Lawson, a member of the HOA board. Instead of scolding the kids, she smiled warmly. "I heard about your little stand from some neighbors," she said. "And from an email." A wry grin suggested she knew exactly who had sent that complaint. Nerves fluttered in Chloe's stomach. "Are you here to shut us down?" Monica held up her hand, dismissing the notion. "Not at all. I'm here to learn more." She glanced at their new sign. "So you're donating some of the proceeds to Willow Creek Animal Shelter?" That's a wonderful cause. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. We really want to help them with medicine and food for the animals. Monica's eyes lit up. My daughter used to volunteer at that very shelter. How much have you raised so far? Chloe told her the approximate amount, adding, we were hoping to keep this going all summer, but Karen, Ms. Hadley, said it violates some rule. Monica sighed. The HOA guidelines were written to prevent full-scale businesses from operating in residential areas. But it was never meant to squash kids' charity work. She paused thoughtfully, then leaned in, lowering her voice. I'll talk to a few other board members. Let's see if we can find a workaround. Relief washed over Chloe and Marcus. For the first time since Karen's arrival, they felt a genuine spark of hope. Monica Lawson might be the ally they needed, a sensible official who saw the bigger picture. They thanked her profusely as she bought a cup of lemonade and dropped a generous donation in their jar. As Monica drove away, the siblings exchanged excited grins. Maybe they wouldn't have to shut down after all. But their optimism, while justified, was about to crash into Karen's relentless determination in a showdown that would test how far one entitled neighbor would go to maintain her vision of order. On Monday afternoon, the doorbell rang at Chloe and Marcus's house. Their dad answered, and there stood Karen, clad in a crisp blazer, holding a clipboard. Her expression was severe, eyes darting around the living room as though hunting for infractions. Good day, Mr. Sinclair, she began formally. I'm here on official HOA business regarding the unauthorized lemonade stand your children have been operating. Their father crossed his arms, bracing himself. We've looked over the regulations, and from what we see, it's ambiguous. Besides, the kids aren't running a store. They're raising charity funds. Karen's lips thinned, unimpressed. The board's stance on unauthorized sales is quite clear. I have every intention of issuing a formal violation notice if that stand continues. Violation notices come with fines, and if those fines aren't paid or the offending activity not ceased, further action can be taken. Chloe and Marcus hovered near the hallway, listening anxiously. Their mother joined them, brow furrowed. We plan to discuss this with Ms. Lawson and others on the board, she said, refusing to be intimidated. Karen exhaled sharply. Ms. Lawson is not the entire board. I've already spoken to the other members, and the consensus is that permitting a stand like this opens the door to more unauthorized businesses. We can't have chaos, can we? She offered a tight, insincere smile. It's nothing personal. Just protecting the community's standards. With that, she thrust a folded document into their father's hands. Consider this your official notice. If that stand remains active beyond Friday, you'll be fined $100 per day. Marcus's heart sank. $100 a day? That penalty could crush their charitable efforts. Karen nodded curtly and left. Through the window, Chloe spotted her pacing the sidewalk, scanning other yards as if making mental notes for future battles. In the living room, the family gathered to read the notice, frustration mounting. The letter cited obscure references to Section 4.2, no unapproved commercial or fundraising activity. The fine structure escalated each week, culminating in possible legal fees if not resolved. This is ridiculous, Chloe murmured, tears of anger pricking her eyes. All we wanted to do was help the shelter. Their dad placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We won't roll over. Let's contact Ms. Lawson and other community members who support you. We'll see if we can get the rule interpreted differently, or even changed. Marcus squared his jaw, determined. We're not giving up. But as the clock ticked toward Friday, tension gripped the family. Could they really fight City Hall, or in this case, the HOA? And if they tried, how far would Karen go to enforce her will? Wednesday morning dawned overcast, the sky a dull gray, a perfect backdrop for the anxiety swirling within Chloe and Marcus. At breakfast, their dad announced a plan. We'll hold a neighborhood meeting tonight, right in our driveway. Let's gather those who support the lemonade stand, discuss the situation, and figure out our next move. All day, Chloe and Marcus typed up flyers inviting neighbors to the meeting, distributing them door to door. Most recipients nodded sympathetically, many outraged by the notion of fining kids. A few, notably older residents who'd had run-ins with Karen, expressed disgust at her pettiness. Still, others stayed tight-lipped, wary of crossing the formidable compliance officer. That evening, the siblings set up folding chairs around their driveway, ironically the same spot as the lemonade stand. By 7 o'clock, a modest group of about 15 neighbors arrived. Among them was Ms. Lawson, smiling supportively. They had just begun discussing their predicament when, as if on cue, Karen appeared at the edge of the driveway, arms folded, a scowl locked on her face. "Oh look, the entire cul-de-sac is here," she said icily. "Please don't tell me this is an impromptu HOA meeting. I don't recall scheduling one." A wave of tension passed through the crowd. Before anyone could respond, Ms. Lawson stepped forward. "We're here unofficially to discuss the viability of the lemonade stand. Many in the community believe it to be a harmless, charitable endeavor that should be allowed." Karen's gaze flicked from Ms. Lawson to the neighbors. "Harmless?" She barked a laugh. "Today it's lemonade. Tomorrow someone sets up a hot dog cart. Then maybe a yard sale every weekend. The rulebook exists for a reason. If we permit one, we must permit all." A man in the group, Mr. Delgado, raised his voice. "We're talking about two kids raising money for animal shelters, not a commercial enterprise." "You're overreacting." Karen's eyes flashed. "We either enforce the bylaws or we don't. If you don't like them, propose an amendment at the official board meeting next month. Until then, the stand is against the rules." Ms. Lawson clenched her fists. "I'd be more receptive to that logic if we didn't already have exceptions, like the annual cookie sale the Girl Scouts hold at the clubhouse." A hush fell. Karen's face reddened. "That's different. That event is specifically on HOA property with board approval. They pay a usage fee. These kids paid nothing." Chloe looked up from her seat, voice trembling. We're okay paying if that's what it takes." "We never heard about a usage fee." Karen scoffed. "Too late for that, sweetie. Your father has the notice. Unless the board reverses itself before Friday, the fines stand." Marcus wanted to shout at her, to call her out for being unfair, but he held back, feeling helpless. The neighbors argued among themselves, some trying to calm tensions. Ms. Lawson promised to schedule an emergency review session with the board, but she admitted it might not happen before the Friday deadline. Karen flashed a condescending smile, as if enjoying the turmoil she'd caused. "Best of luck," she said. "But rules are rules." Then she pivoted on her heel and stalked off, leaving behind a stormy silence. Thursday arrived, and with it, a last-ditch effort to save the lemonade stand. Ms. Lawson called an emergency board session that evening, but half of the members weren't available on short notice. Still, they managed to gather 3 of the 5, including Ms. Lawson and the HOA president, Mr. Barnes, who hadn't fully committed to Karen's perspective. Chloe and Marcus, along with their parents, attended the mini-meeting. It felt tense. Karen was there, silent but visibly simmering with impatience. Ms. Lawson spoke passionately about how the kids were raising money for Willow Creek Animal Shelter and how community spirit should allow for charitable stands. Mr. Barnes looked thoughtful, flipping through the bylaws. Suddenly, a board member named Ms. Jenkins, who had been quiet, cleared her throat. "Karen, didn't you mention your father had health issues a few years back? Weren't you on the receiving end of local charitable donations at that time?" Karen stiffened, color draining from her face. "That's hardly relevant." "Isn't it, though?" Ms. Jenkins pressed. "My understanding is you accepted a fundraiser from your old neighborhood when he needed help with hospital bills. So how is that different from these children raising money for animals in need?" For a fleeting moment, genuine hurt flickered in Karen's eyes. She stammered, "That was a special circumstance. And it was not on private property. My father's neighbors organized it through official channels." Chloe and Marcus exchanged a shocked look. If Karen once benefited from a community fundraiser, could that soften her stance? Mr. Barnes sighed. "I see no direct rule stating kids can't operate a stand for a charitable cause, especially if they're willing to pay any standard usage fee. The question is, do we want to set a precedent?" Karen's mouth tightened, but she stayed silent, arms crossed, as Ms. Lawson jumped in. "Maybe we can work out a limited time permit. They pay a nominal fee, schedule certain hours, and keep it about charity. That should avoid the slippery slope you're worried about." A flicker of hope ignited in Chloe. If the board approved something along those lines, they could keep raising money without facing the crushing fines. But Karen refused to relent. "We can't just create an exception on a whim. It has to go to a formal vote, and the earliest that can happen is next month's full board meeting. Let's not pretend otherwise." The meeting ended with no resolution. The board members filed out, some looking apologetic. Karen barely glanced at the Sinclair family as she left, her posture rigid with indignation. Outside the community hall, Ms. Lawson pulled Chloe and Marcus aside. Keep your stand down until we can sort this out. If you operate tomorrow, Karen will fine you. She grimaced. I'm sorry, I'm trying. Dejected, the siblings nodded. Back home, they dismantled the lemonade stand for the night, feeling a gnawing sense of injustice. Friday was just hours away, and without official clearance, they risked burying themselves in HOA fines. Could this truly be the end of their summer mission? Friday dawned hot and muggy, the sun blazing early. By mid-morning, the thermometer in the backyard soared toward 90 degrees. Typically, such weather would be perfect for selling cold lemonade. But the stand lay folded in the garage, and the siblings lounged on the living room couch, gloom etched on their faces. It's so unfair, Marcus muttered, flipping through TV channels aimlessly. We were actually doing well, too. Chloe exhaled a long sigh. We're only $20 short of our target donation goal for the shelter. She rummaged in her pocket, producing a handful of coins. If only we had one more day. Their mom joined them, carrying fresh cold drinks. I'm sorry, guys, she said. We'll figure out another way to raise money. Maybe an online fundraiser or a yard sale at a friend's house outside the HOA. Neither child responded. The idea of letting Karen's pettiness win felt like a punch to the gut. The minutes dragged, with each passing hour reminding them they should be out there, doing something good. Around noon, a knock sounded at the door. Marcus answered it and found Ms. Lawson standing there, sweating lightly from the sweltering sun. She held a letter in her hand. I have news, she said, face neutral. The board convened an emergency vote online this morning. Mr. Barnes had a change of heart after reviewing some of the feedback from neighbors. They've decided to grant you a temporary one-week permit to operate a lemonade stand under certain conditions, like set hours and a small fee of $10. Chloe, who had rushed to the door, let out a delighted gasp. Are you serious? She squeaked. Ms. Lawson nodded, her features brightening. Yes, but it's only official for the next week. After that, we'll see about a longer-term rule amendment. Karen isn't happy she voted no, but the majority overrode her. If you set up now and pay the fee, you can operate without penalty. Joy and relief flooded the siblings. Their dad, joining them, shook Ms. Lawson's hand. Thank you. Really. This means so much to our kids and to the animals at Willow Creek Shelter. Ms. Lawson gave a small, tired smile. Just watch out. Karen might still try to cause trouble, so keep everything above board. No further encouragement was needed. Within minutes, Chloe and Marcus were outside, reassembling their stand. They placed the newly minted official permit, a single sheet of paper signed by Mr. Barnes, in a plastic sleeve, taping it to the table for all to see. A neighbor who noticed the commotion asked if the stand was back in business, and soon word spread like wildfire through West Oak Meadows. By early afternoon, a small crowd had gathered, either to buy lemonade or simply witness the forbidden stand that defied Karen's wrath. Their tip jar overflowed with donations as supporters chipped in well beyond the 50-cent asking price. Some folks even brought small gifts for the animal shelter, cans of dog food, old blankets, cat toys. To Chloe and Marcus, it was a magical turnaround, proof that not everyone blindly followed rigid rules. Their hearts soared with each cup sold, each kind word received. And yet, as they poured lemonade for a neighbor, an uneasy hush fell. Strolling up the sidewalk, posture stiff, gaze as cold as winter, came Karen. A hush blanketed the crowd. Even the summer breeze seemed to pause as Karen approached, clipboard in hand. She stopped right in front of the table, scanning the new sign and the official permit taped to its surface. Her lips twisted into a bitter expression. So the board went behind my back, she said, voice laced with anger. I told them it was a slippery slope, but apparently democracy rules. Marcus stepped forward cautiously, heart thumping. We followed the rules, Ms. Hadley. We paid the fee, got the permit. A sham permit. Karen hissed, eyes blazing. This whole situation is nothing but the neighborhood pitying you. The board had no right to override our established guidelines. Some neighbors gathered around, arms folded. Mr. Delgado, who was sipping lemonade, cleared his throat. I think you'll find the board does have that right. They've voted, and you were outnumbered. Karen ignored him, focusing her fiery gaze on Chloe and Marcus. You think you're special. You can just break rules because you're charitable? This is precisely the kind of nonsense that brings down property values. Next, we'll have craft booths, rummage sales, this entire street turning into a bazaar. Chloe's cheeks burned with indignation. We're just kids trying to help animals, she said, voice trembling. Why is that so awful? For a split second, Karen's face flickered with something like regret or sadness. Then it hardened again. Don't you dare twist this around. I have every right to file an appeal on this permit. She brandished her clipboard. And I will. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed away, leaving a trail of uneasy whispers in her wake. Clearly, Karen wasn't done fighting. But for now, the stand was open, and the kids were free to sell lemonade without incurring fines. A cautious sense of relief prevailed. That afternoon, the siblings surpassed their original fundraising goal. They even tallied enough money to consider doubling their donation to Willow Creek Shelter. The community's generosity felt overwhelming. More than once, Chloe's eyes misted with gratitude. Still, a knot of anxiety remained. Karen's threat to file an appeal hung over them like a dark cloud. It wasn't over yet, but at least for this day, the kids savored the sweet taste of victory. A few days later, Ms. Lawson informed the Sinclair family that Karen had indeed filed a formal appeal, demanding the permit be revoked. The board scheduled an emergency session for Wednesday evening at the community clubhouse, where both parties could present arguments. Whether the stand could continue beyond the one-week permit hinged on this hearing. Determined to stand their ground, Chloe and Marcus prepared by gathering supportive notes from neighbors and an official thank you letter from the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. Their father organized a slideshow of how the kids' stand positively impacted the neighborhood's sense of community. Meanwhile, Karen prepared her own arsenal, highlighting every instance of crowding, noise, or trash around the stand, some of it legitimate, much of it exaggerated. Wednesday night arrived, tense and electric. Dozens of neighbors packed the small clubhouse, curious to witness the final decision. At the front of the room sat the HOA board members, Mr. Barnes, Ms. Lawson, Ms. Jenkins, and the other two who had missed the previous sessions. Karen stood on one side, arms crossed. The Sinclair family and their children stood on the other, papers in hand. Mr. Barnes struck a gavel lightly against the table. We're here to decide the fate of the one-week lemonade stand permit. Karen, you may state your case. Karen cleared her throat, her composure practiced. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. This stand represents a direct violation of our core principle. No commercial activity on private property without thorough approval. Even though these children paid a nominal fee, the process was rushed and incomplete. We risk setting a dangerous precedent. We must rescind the permit and fine them for any day they've operated outside the established guidelines. Ms. Lawson frowned, but the board voted to grant that permit. Are you suggesting we overturn a legitimate decision? Karen's voice tightened. Yes, if the decision itself is flawed. This entire fiasco was orchestrated by certain members who wished to flout the rules for sentimental reasons. She shot Ms. Lawson a pointed glare. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Mr. Barnes turned to the Sinclair family. Your response. Mr. Sinclair stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Chloe's shoulder. We understand the need for bylaws, but let's remember the HOA's purpose is to foster a safe, friendly community. A simple lemonade stand run by children, raising money for an animal shelter, no less, poses no real threat to property values or neighborhood standards. Mrs. Sinclair added, we complied once we learned about the fee and permit. The stand is neat, quiet, and operational only in daytime hours. Neighbors actually seem happier. We've collected letters from them expressing support. At a nod from Ms. Lawson, Chloe shyly approached the board. She held up a letter from Willow Creek Shelter. They said her donations will pay for spaying and neutering several stray animals. This is more than a fun summer project. It's making a difference. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but Ms. Jenkins spoke up. Karen, we know you worry about a precedent. But let's not pretend we haven't allowed Girl Scout cookie tables or bake sales in the past. This is in the same spirit, if not simpler. A hush fell. Karen's jaw set. Those events took place at the clubhouse or had prior board approval. This did not. Sensing tension, Mr. Barnes tapped his gavel again. We'll let the board cast votes on two issues. First, whether the kids can keep their stand for the remainder of summer under a regulated schedule. Second, whether an amendment should be introduced for future cases of small-scale charitable stands. The votes commenced. Ms. Lawson voted yes on both points. Ms. Jenkins followed suit. The two additional members, after some deliberation, also voted yes, citing the clear community backing. It came down to Mr. Barnes. He paused, eyeing Karen, then the hopeful faces of Chloe and Marcus. I vote in favor of maintaining the stand with a regulated schedule for the rest of the summer. Let's propose an official bylaw amendment at next month's meeting to avoid confusion in the future. Applause erupted from the audience, joy shining in the children's eyes. Karen stood rigid, face pale with anger. She had lost. The official ruling, the lemonade stand could remain, and so could the kids' mission to help the shelter. Just as people began to disperse, Karen spoke, voice wavering. Fine. Keep your stand. Enjoy it. But if the neighborhood descends into chaos, remember I warned you all. She turned to leave, but paused, glancing at Chloe. Congratulations, she added softly, then stalked out. The tension dissolved into celebration. Neighbors congratulated the kids. Ms. Lawson beamed. Marcus and Chloe hugged their parents, relief flooding them. For a moment, they could scarcely believe they had triumphed. In the following days, the lemonade stand thrived under the new official schedule. Weekends only, from noon until 4 p.m., with a sign clearly stating its charitable purpose. Donations poured in from sympathetic neighbors and even passers-by from outside the community who heard about the story on social media. While Karen kept her distance, she occasionally passed by, glaring but saying nothing. Rumors swirled that she felt humiliated by losing the vote. A few residents tried to empathize, recalling her father's medical fundraiser years ago. Some speculated that the reason Karen fought so hard was her own fear of vulnerability or worry about losing control. But she never confirmed or denied these speculations, remaining as stern and aloof as ever. Nevertheless, the stand achieved a tangible victory. Chloe and Marcus reached double their original donation goal, then triple, by the end of July. They delivered the funds to Willow Creek Animal Shelter in person, greeted by cheers from the shelter staff and excited tail wags from the dogs. The children's hearts swelled with pride, grateful that their neighborly supporters had stood up to bureaucracy, and a particularly petty HOA Karen. By the end of summer, West Oak Meadows was abuzz with talk of the next board meeting. Ms. Lawson planned to introduce a formal rule allowing small-scale charitable stands or events, as long as they were safe, quiet, and complied with basic fees. While the outcome remained uncertain, many believed the board would pass the amendment, especially in light of Karen's public defeat. On the final day of the lemonade stand, Chloe and Marcus posted a handwritten sign, "Thank you, West Oak Meadows. We couldn't have done it without you." Customers lined up for one last cup, smiling, laughing, and celebrating the kids' success. On a warm evening at the tail end of August, the Sinclair family gathered in their backyard for a small cookout, joined by Ms. Lawson, Mr. Delgado, and a few others who had been vocal supporters. The conversation flowed with talk of the upcoming school year, new local events, and the general relief that the lemonade drama had finally settled. Around dusk, the group heard a light knock at the backyard gate. Marcus opened it, finding Karen standing there in casual clothes, no clipboard in sight. The hush that fell was palpable. Karen looked uncomfortable, holding a small envelope. "I wanted to drop this off," she said, extending it toward Chloe. Inside the envelope was a modest donation of $20 and a handwritten note. Asterisk, for Willow Creek Animal Shelter. I should have seen the good you were doing sooner. Asterisk. Chloe and Marcus exchanged stunned glances. The tension of the past months weighed heavily in the silence. Then Chloe offered a small smile, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Karen cleared her throat. "It's not a big deal. Just do some good with it." She looked around at the group, shoulders tense. "Well, that's all. I should go." Before anyone could respond, she turned and left, disappearing into the dark. Despite her abrupt exit, that small gesture felt like an olive branch. Maybe she wasn't as heartless as everyone believed. Maybe her strictness was a shield she didn't know how to lower. Whatever the case, the Sinclair family and their neighbors accepted the donation with gratitude, resolving to pay it forward to the shelter. In the days that followed, some in West Oak Meadows whispered about Karen's last-minute gesture, speculating on her motives. But no matter her reasoning, the kids' lemonade stand had proven a powerful point. Kindness and community spirit can withstand even the most stringent of HOA rules and the most persistent of Karens. And so ends the tale of a neighborhood lemonade stand that sparked a war of wills with an HOA Karen. Thanks to determined kids, supportive neighbors, and one surprising twist, good intentions triumphed over petty regulations. If you enjoyed this story of community drama and a Karen meltdown, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales, and comment below with your own HOA experiences. Until next time, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of lemonade for a cause.